Market Journal, television for agricultural business decisions, is a presentation of the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine.
Hello everyone, I'm Bill Dodd and thanks for joining us today on Market Journal. Troy Mowling is off this week, and we hope you all are doing well and staying safe out there, but we've got a jam-packed show for you today, so let's jump right in. To start things off today, it's been 1 year since several crop producers in Wyoming and western Nebraska were abruptly cut off from their water supply during one of the most crucial times for irrigation. On July 17th of 2019, the Goshen-Gearing-Fort Laramie Irrigation District's Tunnel No. 2 collapsed. This caused a breach in the main canal that ultimately dried up water supplies to the south side of the North Platte River. This story was a especially heartbreaking occurrence for many who went through the ordeal. And 1 year later, we look back on the crisis to see how things are continuing to progress.
Over the span of 42 days in the summer of 2019, during a very critical time for irrigation, several producers lost access to water following a disastrous breach in the Goshen-Gearing-Fort Laramie Irrigation District Tunnel No. 2. In total, 107,000 acres in the North Platte River Valley of Nebraska and Wyoming were affected by the disaster. In other words, roughly 35% of the total acres irrigated by surface water in the North Platte River Valley were unable to access water they needed at a time they needed it most. Many producers were facing the potential of their crops withering in the climbing heats of late summer, and in many cases, a sizable economic loss. The outlook at the time was dire, to say the least.
So for corn and beans, I don't think it's too optimistic. They are at their critical growth stage. Corn is at their reproductive stage from V12 to Blister. So this is a stage they need most water. Same thing for dry edible beans. They're about to flowering, and some they already are. Again, they need water at this stage. So if it's really stressed at this point, and for next few weeks, corn will be a total loss, and there might be some left on the beans. And for sugar beets, that's probably the most optimistic crop in this situation.
When the problem first arose, there were plenty of questions to go around. The biggest of which were how did it happen, and who would hold responsibility for the repairs. These were two of the first questions that needed to be answered before funding and repairs could begin. However, that task was much easier said than done.
Yeah, this is a really interesting situation. The canal system here was built by the Bureau of Reclamation in the early 1900s, and then those canals are maintained by local irrigation districts, and there are two districts that are responsible for this tunnel. And so as we were looking at a structure of its age and the extremely wet weather events that we've had this year, that makes it really difficult to pinpoint a cause and then who's responsible for this canal break.
Local authorities were getting up to speed just as quickly as they could get information. One thing that quickly became evident was the fact that not only was there a problem with Tunnel No. 2, but Tunnel No. 1 would need repairs as well. With livelihoods on the line, tensions were beginning to run high. Those on the front lines of the event were fast to act in trying to initiate repairs. However, with a job this size, there are always several laws to work around and many steps that need to be taken before much real progress can begin to take shape.
The first 2 or 3 days, we were in an aggressive mode to start putting it back together, to do whatever was necessary to get the system up and running again. And after about the third day, we started having to deal with laws, statutes, channels to have to go through. And after about the 5th day, I was ready to yank anybody that opened their mouth up to yank their lips off. It is a very, very frustrating, very irritating law when you're in a hurry to try to save the livelihood of individuals. But regardless of nevertheless, you have to back up and take a breath and readdress it in a manner that's civil and level-headed. So
However, in the end, repairs began, and for the most part, things seem to be getting back to normal. Water is once again flowing to producers. Nonetheless, there have been restrictions put in place for the amount of water that is currently accessible.
Tunnels 1 and 2, they put ribs the full length of those tunnels, and they figure they are restricted back to 80 to 85% of their normal flow. So right now they're only pushing about 1,200 second feet through those tunnels. That's all they can get through them at this point in time. Tunnel number 3, consequently, once the water gets down to there, the Nebraska growers are going to be restricted to about 75% of their normal. So they are running, I won't say short of water, but they're running with less water than what they've had in the past. They started the water season sooner in hopes that, they might be able to build the soil moisture profiles up, have water there to draw on for at least the beets and the corn that are deeper rooted, that they could draw on some moisture from the soil.
Looking back at where we were and where we are now, 1 year later, things seem to be on the up and up, with spirits much higher than they were at this time last year.
I guess everybody was in a state of shock. I mean, nothing like this had ever happened in the past. It was all brand new. Tensions started to run pretty high because all of a sudden you don't have water. You don't have too much, you don't have any. And there are very, very few wells over on the south side of the river. So for those growers that had wells, that might have helped them out a little bit. But for the most part, tensions are running high. Things kind of mellowed out as the season went along last summer into the fall. We finally got water in the ditch. They were able to water the beets and the corn. The dry beans had failed just because they're a shallow-rooted crop and could not draw on any soil moisture that might have been there. Since then, it's, growers have come to accept it, I believe. They've got water back in the ditch, and that's what they wanted to see the most. They are watering their crops. Things are looking well, even though they're kind of dry out here, but things are looking well. So that's kind of what the mood's been. It's went from shock to probably anger to some point to kind of maybe back to normal.
All in all, it's pretty amazing to see what a difference can be made in just 1 year.
While water flow is currently reduced, once final repairs on both tunnels have been completed, normal volumes of water flow should return. If you'd like to learn more about the tunnel collapse and progress on repairs, you can visit cropwatch.unl.edu, and we've also posted a link for additional information on the Market Journal website. Well, next up, it's time to jump into the markets, and since we're in the height of the summer grilling season, we're going to take a look at the beef side of the markets today. And joining the program remotely this week is the owner and operator of Briggs Feed Yard in Seward, Nebraska, Mr. Mike Briggs. And Mike, there's certainly a lot to discuss on the cattle side of the markets this week. What are some things that producers should be paying particular attention to as we anticipate the forthcoming cattle on feed report due out next week?
Well, I think one of the things producers need to be aware of is the situation that we have now is very fluid. Things change constantly, things change daily. I think the situation we're in right now, Nebraska has done a really good job of getting all their overfat cattle cleaned up. In fact, on the conference call this morning, one of the things that kept saying where are all these cattle? Well, all these cattle that are backed up are down in Kansas and Texas. Now, our slaughter levels have been such, our harvest levels have been such that I think we're doing a really good job cleaning up those cattle. But I think those of us in Nebraska that sit in our little worlds that don't get out very much, I would be one of those people. I don't think we have a full understanding of how many cattle are actually down in Kansas and Texas. Those feed yards are so large and there's so many of them. And it's going to take a while for those guys to catch up and get all those cattle harvested that need to be harvested. When we stand here and look around in Nebraska and look at all the empty feed yards, and we're like, why doesn't this thing take off? In fact, somebody said today, gosh, if it wouldn't be for the virus, we'd probably have $1.50 live cattle. Well, yeah, from our vantage point, that might be correct. But I think there's an awful lot of cattle in the South yet that have to get harvested for this thing to really correct.
So, Mike, there's been a lot of talk about producers facing the decision of whether or not to euthanize livestock due to meatpacking bottlenecks. However, for the week ending July 11th, total beef production was up 12.2% from the previous week and 4.2% higher than a year ago. Conversely, cumulative beef production for the year was down 3%. So how should producers be interpreting these numbers, and are we starting to see an uptick in production and processing?
Those are curious numbers in my mind. I can't believe that we're 3% lower than last year. The reason you see such a massive amount of increase of actual product is because these animals got backed up. They're so large that we're putting extra pounds on the market, and the production's getting cranked up because as people got over the coronavirus, the COVID, and started coming back to work, they could start harvesting more cattle. The one really good thing, and I think I said this the last time we were together, that the packer has tremendous incentive to harvest as many cattle as he can. And that's great, because if he doesn't have any incentive, this thing drags out a lot longer. But because he's so profitable, that's what I mean by incentive. He's making a lot of money. They're going to try to chew through as many cattle as they can. And now that they've got their employees back, hopefully we can clean this thing up rather quickly.
Now, one thing I keep reading is basis is negative right now. Can you explain why that is and how it's affecting prices?
Basis is really a fantastic determinant of demand. So what that's kind of saying is, it's true. We've got more fat cattle than there is really demand for the beef, and the amount of cattle. We've kind of overwhelmed the system because of those cattle we backed up. So now you've got a little bit of a problem. The packer can only take so many. So now that's what happens to basis. Basis falls away. When cattle are short, you'll see a positive basis. So the other thing that does, and that tells the producer, is, hey, don't sell your cattle. And I think that's part of what's going on. If you look back in March, April, May, our placement numbers were really low. So we've got a little bit of a hole that developed in September, October. Well, the market's trying to get producers to drag those cattle, feed them a little longer, and let's fill that hole. And so that's why you see a negative basis, because as we talked, like an incentive for the packer, that's a disincentive. A negative basis is a disincentive for feed yards to market cattle. Now, hopefully that disincentive doesn't end up causing a problem down the road, that we make cattle even bigger and put even more meat on the market that the market can't handle. But I think that's the one thing that's been really encouraging to me to drag this out. Demand has never really wavered through this whole thing. Demand has been excellent. Unfortunately, when we got short meat product because COVID hitting the plants and them not being able to harvest, we got meat shortages, and then the price got jacked up. And unfortunately, the retailer hasn't quite lowered those prices back down to where he could, because he feels like he got gouged on the way up, which he probably did by the packer. But so now he's trying to recoup his losses. But for us to really move product, and I think we really could move a lot of product if we get these prices back down to where they were in February and March, where everything was more normal. I think our demand would take care of this really quickly. Hopefully the retailer will feel comfortable to continue to lower prices as we move forward.
And with basis being so negative, one bit of advice I've heard is that it would make sense to market fat cattle with an at-the-money put option and a $4 to $6 out-of-the-money call option. Could this type of action help create a synthetic short futures position? Is there anything to this theory?
Well, I think I understand what that person is saying. What they're saying is, this isn't a good time to go ahead and hedge your cattle or forward contract your cattle because of that negative basis. But anymore, you just really have to have some kind of risk protection. So if you're buying a put, you're buying the right, but not the obligation to sell your cattle. So if you buy that put, and then to help pay for that put, you're selling a call over the top. Some people call that a fence or a window, whichever. But now you've given yourself a chance for the price to run up, and hopefully at the same time that basis will narrow. There's no guarantee for that basis. That's one of the risks that you really can't alleviate unless you contract with the packer. So you're going to have to take a little bit of a risk there. But I know if I was buying cattle right now, I'm not. If I was, I'd be buying puts because I'm bullish the future. I really am, because I really think we'll get this thing cleaned up. The only real damage to demand we did was our exports, and that's because the products got too high. That will come back into line as the price comes back into line. And I'm pretty friendly to the cattle market out front now. I'm not expecting a $20 rally, but at least we could get fat cattle back in the teens, which right now we're sitting at 95 to $1. So that's a reasonable sized rally. Typically your rallies are $12 to $15. On that note, since I said that, the down we had in the market was $29.60. That's how severe the price drop was in the cattle.
Now, the latest trade data from May of 2020 showed a decrease in beef exports due to COVID-19 related disruptions in beef production. There was a sharp drop-off with exports to Mexico and Japan, and these are two of our top purchasers. How concerning should that be for producers, and what course of action would you advise at this time?
Hopefully our new NAFTA agreement is a big help with that, and I think they will come back. That was just a huge disruption. The price got way too high, and especially for Mexico, because of the type of meats they buy a lot of variety meats and a lot of lower end cuts. That stuff just got out of line. Now, once it comes back into line, I fully expect them to come back, fully expect Canada to come back. Now, I don't know the actual specifics of the beef trade with the new NAFTA agreement. I know that's not the correct term anymore, but listening to our president, they're very favorable, and I imagine that they are. I'm not worried about that. Those guys will come back. All of the export business will come back when you see prices normalize.
Big thanks to Mike for joining us this week. Next week, we'll be joined by Tradeos's Doug Simon. So if you have a question you'd like for us to ask him, email us or get in touch on social media, and we'll be sure to pass that question along. And it's time now for weather with Nebraska Extension climatologist and Market Journal chief meteorologist Al Dutcher. And Al, we've had our fair share of fun in the sun this summer, but with crops getting into their reproductive stages, do we have any cool down or precipitation to look forward to in the coming days?
Well, we certainly have seen our first tastes of summer this past week. We've had a few days of those hot 90-degree temperatures and above, and of course the winds and the drier conditions, particularly out west, which has led to an expansion of the drought. We will get to that in a second. But more importantly, we got some very hot temperatures this weekend, very high dew points, very stressful conditions both to humans and to animals. We expect that that'll probably break as we go into early next week, but models are indicating we're going to return back to this hot and dry pattern, especially western Nebraska, as we go into late next week. The biggest concern will be eastern Nebraska as we get next week, and that will be because the dew point temperatures are going to be so extreme. They're probably going to be dealing with these heat stratus indices once again, and it furthermore may even be hotter than this previous time. We'll just have to wait and see how the models project out. But overall, let's go to the models and see what we can expect as we go forward in time. Before we get to the upper air models, the latest drought monitor that was issued Thursday indicates that we've seen a dryness expansion in the high plains region, in particular Nebraska Panhandle, and would expect to see that intensify as we go into next week, barring a major precipitation event. Have seen moderate drought conditions also in southwest, south central, and northeastern Nebraska, moving down into the Omaha area. We may see some improving conditions there if we get the precipitation forecasted by the model. So let's get right to the models. And we'll see today we're dealing with that upper air trough over the northern plains in southern Canada. Get a zonal flow across Nebraska with very hot temperatures to our south. That's going to build in over the day. And we'll see temperatures well into the 90s across the southern part of the state, upper 80s, low 90s across the north. Low pressure develops over northern Kansas, but it keeps most of the moisture to the north and east of us as it converges with the cooler air to our north. As we go into tomorrow morning, we'll start to see a little wave moving across the state. Doesn't much in the way of lift, but at least there is opportunity with low pressure developing on the lee of the Rocky Mountains for us to at least get some lift in southeastern Nebraska, possibly generating some isolated to scattered thunderstorm activity. More importantly, as we get into Monday, we'll start to see a cool down from the extreme heat expected on Sunday when we see temperatures basically around the 100-degree mark in the southern part of the state. We'll see low pressure developing in northwestern Kansas. And with that cool air moving in from the north, we'll get a convergence across Nebraska to severe thunderstorm activity across the state. best chances will be across the eastern part of the state on Tuesday. We don't see much movement in that upper air trough, so low pressure of the Texas Panhandle may lift enough moisture up to force some convergence along that cool air to the north of us, meaning thunderstorm and shower activity across the southern part of the state. Then the ridge starts to rebuild back in, and we move from cooler than normal conditions to basically normal to above normal conditions as high pressure firmly in control to our north and east. We'll still see a southerly flow bringing very humid air into our region, and that warm air will start to make its way in earnest into our region as we get into Thursday, lifting that moisture to the north with some scattered shower activity. And a little weak wave moves around that ridge on Thursday, possibly generating some thunderstorm activity as we see some of that moisture, deep moisture from the south move up and interact with the frontal boundary. But once again, it looks very light and scattered across east, central, and southeast. On Friday, the ridge really builds to our north. Very hot conditions in store for much of the central and northern plains. Low pressure forms on this lee of the Rockies. The GFS does indicate that we'll see some heavy thunderstorm activity across eastern Nebraska. I'm not sure if that will materialize, but at least there's an opportunity there. Further out, 8 to 14 keeps the heat in place for next Thursday to the following Tuesday, with upper 90s probably well widespread, and in terms of precipitation, just a complete lack of moisture for the central and southern plains. So, Bill, looks like it's going to be a hot weekend. We get scattered thunderstorm cool down next week, early in the week, then right back to the heat, and the extended keeps that heat into the end of the month. And if you look at the CPC, they're keeping hot and dry conditions in favor for the central and southern plains for the month of August.
Thanks, Al. Moving on, and it's hard enough to find a needle in a haystack, but what about a beetle? Blister beetles have the potential to cause injury to horses if ingested with harvested forage. We recently spoke with Nebraska Extension entomology educator Dave Boxler to find out more about this potentially harmful pest.
Well, blister beetles vary in size and shape, but can be recognized by their long, narrow bodies, broad heads, and antennae that are about a third of the length of their body. They range in from 9/16 of an inch to about 1.25 inches in length. Blister beetles can be found in alfalfa and other crops used for forage. Blister beetles will feed on plant foliage and occasionally cause some insignificant damage to soybean fields. The bodies of the blister beetles contain a chemical called cantharidin, which is a terpenoid that can cause blisters on skin tissue upon contact. Horses are very susceptible to this particular chemical. All or part of the horse's digestive system can be severely irritated, leading to infections and bleeding. The minimum estimated lethal dose of cantharidin is 1 milligram per 2.2 pounds of body weight. And especially here in Nebraska, the three-stripe blister beetle has the most cantharidin of the species that we have here in Nebraska. So the clinical signs of cantharidin poisoning may include blisters and ulcers in the mouth, gastritis, colic, diarrhea, and bloody feces. So if cantharidin poisoning is suspected, please contact your veterinarian as quickly as possible. A way to prevent or reduce the chances of getting cantharidin poisoning requires by the hay producer focused scouting and good management practices. Normally, blister beetles are commonly found on field borders unless there are population of flowering weeds in the fields. The flowering plants attract the beetles because they're going to be feeding on the pollen and nectar of those flowering plants. So scout your field 2 to 3 days before harvest. Also, it would be wise to harvest alfalfa or other hay before flowering of alfalfa. Cutting alfalfa before 5% bloom really reduces the risk of blister beetle contamination. And if sizable blister beetle populations are found, prolong harvest a couple of days and allow the beetles to leave the field. Some people would like to apply an insecticide to kill the beetles in the field at the time. However, research by Kansas State University as well as Colorado State University indicates that dead beetles will still contain a very active amount of cantharidin, and they can be incorporated into the hay upon harvest. And all it takes is about 4 to 6 grams of dried beetles to be fatal to a horse. Another method of reducing or preventing the chance of cantharidin poisoning is changing your harvesting methods. So you might think about using a sickle bar mower or a rotary mower and not crimping the beetles or crimping the hay. So that those are steps that you can use to avoid this particular problem.
If you need help identifying blister beetles in your field, you can send a pest sample to the UNL Plant and Pest Diagnostic Clinic. We'll post a link to that on our website. And finally today, western bean cutworm moths have been spotted in several locations around the state. And if you haven't been on the lookout yet, the time to start scouting for these pests is now. When scouting, it's recommended to check at least 20 plants in a minimum of 5 different areas of the field in question. You should begin by identifying eggs at the top of the surface leaves in the upper third of the leaves, as well as larvae in the tassel or leaf axils. Eggs will tend to hatch when corn plants are in the late whorl stage of growth and have a high survival rate. As of now, there's only one type of Bt protein that provides much certainty of protection. Products that highlight the effective VIP3A protein include Agrasure, Viptera, Leptra, and Trisepta. The treatment should provide effective control and shouldn't need any further treatment. However, when using these products, it's still highly advisable to continue scouting throughout your fields. For corn hybrids that aren't equipped to provide Bt control, you may consider applying an insecticide if roughly 5 to 8% of plants have egg masses or larvae. Aerial application or chemigation can also provide quality control for these pests if applications are completed before larvae enter the ear of the plant. If you'd like more information on scouting and treating for these and other pests, you can visit cropwatch.unl.edu. We've also included a link to the Nebraska Extension Guide for Weed, Disease, and Insect Management in Nebraska on the Market Journal website as well. And that's going to do it for this week's show. If you missed out on a story, be sure to download the Market Journal mobile app or follow us on social media to join in on the conversation. And don't forget, you can always get the latest updates on the coronavirus outbreak at covid19.unl.edu. We hope to see you right back here next time. Till then, I'm Bill Dodd. Thanks for watching.
Join Market Journal online at marketjournal.unl.edu. You can also follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine. Market Journal is produced by the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources.